When you drive up that mountain road and you see all the factories, the windmills on the skyline, everything's down to the one man.
He's involved in cement, property, glass bottling. He's involved in hotels, pubs.
We're just making armfuls of money. Quinn Direct was making £200 million a year of profit.
He was on the Forbes list of billionaires.
And then you just start thinking about how can the money make money?
This gamble on Anglo through CFDs had just gone spectacularly wrong. The family owed $2.8 billion.
They took Quinn Insurance from underneath them. There's this assumption that Quinn will buy his way out of trouble.
He proved to be absolutely opposed to any kind of restructuring that didn't have him at the centre of it.
It genuinely never dawned on us that we were going to take the Quinn Group. People were on aeroplanes that evening trying to move assets into different names to keep them safe.
We first met Sean Quinn way back in November 2018. Since then, this story has changed dramatically, and in many ways, it's still unfolding. Now, we're heading back to the border for the last time for the final interview with Sean Quinn. Are we ready to go?
Still rolling.
By early 2011, Sean Quinn was in debt to the tune of €3.6 billion. He owed €2.4 billion to the taxpayer in the form of IBRC for loans he took out on Anglo shares, and a further €1.2 billion to American bondholders. The existence of the Quinn empire was on the line. For Sean Quinn and his supporters, the final straw came in April of that year, when the state sent a team north of the border from Dublin to take control of his businesses.
Now, where do we go?
That's the hot seat there, Sean.
When you set the tone for war, when you set the tone to go in and use those heavy hands and put on security people all around the place, up the mountain, 100 people to make sure that everything was okay, in a place that was so peaceful. We had come through from 1973 to 2000, and there was trouble in the north, and there was people being killed and shot right, left and centre. And the Quinn Group worked their way through all of that and never had any trouble. And for them to come in and do what they done, I think it was absolutely disgraceful, and I'll believe that the last day I take a breath.
On the 14th of April 2011, the receivers went into the buildings and secured the buildings of the Quinn businesses in Ireland, and they weren't coming back. But, you know, an office block in Russia takes a bit longer, and the ownership is in a particular company, and maybe only Sean Quinn and a handful of people know where exactly the ownership of that sits.
For us, this was the beginning of the next stage of the process. We had finally got to a position, we thought, where we could actually control what was going to happen to the group of companies. As time went by, we found that that was more and more problematic, particularly for the property assets outside of Ireland. We knew we were into the beginning of something new, but we didn't realise at that stage quite how difficult it was going to be.
I mean, it was a whole sequence of completely unprecedented events, but that was a really stunning turn of events for Sean Quinn. The court cases played out about the ownership of the International Property Group, and the court came down on the side of IBRC and decided that, yes, the Quinns had proactively put a scheme in place to put these properties beyond the bank.
I guess I first looked at the Sean Quinn story around November 2011 when he first went bankrupt. Then we got a lucky break, a Lithuanian individual and a London lawyer who wanted to meet us because they had a videotape.
Two things there is. One,
that purported to show the Quinns doing some sort of a deal in Kiev. They brought me inside, they opened up a laptop on the table, they plugged in the headphones and they just let me listen. And I knew straight away that this thing was going to be dynamite.
Is there somewhere, just before we go to, obviously we're not happy with the 100,000 or will we take it? Is there somewhere for us to put it? Is there somewhere?
It showed Peter Quinn and Sean Quinn Jr. speaking to Russian guys with a translator present. I was told the restaurant was in Kiev. They were talking about a deal involving the Ukrainian shopping centre, which was one of their principal assets in the Ukraine. To siphon that off, what Peter Quinn did in Kiev was he did a deal with a Ukrainian businessman who agreed to pay far below the value of the asset for the asset, knowing that it was going to be contested, right? He knew that there was a legal fight over this asset back home in Ireland.
To stay out of jail, we have to deny consent.
They began to think that Peter Quinn possibly might renege on the deal. So they called him to a meeting. And at the same time, the Quinns started to believe that the Ukrainians would renege on the deal. It was two parties who both believed the other was double-crossing them, getting together to try and resolve the situation. The Ukrainians recorded it, I think, just to have some sort of leverage against the Quinns if they needed it. And the killer line, though, given that at that very time the Quinns were facing contempt charges for lying about disseminating their assets, and on that tape, towards the end of it, was when Peter Quinn turns around to the Russians and says, look, if I'd have to lie, it'd be no big deal, basically.
That wouldn't overly worry me.
There were 500 million euro worth of assets that the Quinns attempted to disseminate all over the world, from India to Russia to elsewhere. Every step of the way, the Quinns denied absolutely everything, but they can't deny something that's on tape.
Sean Quinn, his son Sean Jr. and Peter Dara Quinn were subject to court orders. The bank tried to seize valuable foreign assets. It found they'd been put beyond the reach of the bank.
Sean Quinn's a very smart man. He understood exactly what he was doing. He chose not to understand. And there was also an inescapable view from Sean Quinn that he owned it all, that it was all his. And as a result, he could do whatever he wanted with it. So if it meant transferring assets from here to there, he was happy to do that.
I think the lengths to which they went to put the property beyond the reach of the banks were extraordinary. They were plotting it for quite a while. Now, it's interesting, you know, it wasn't particularly well thought out strategy. It wasn't one that was entirely foolproof. And in terms of the people that they hired to assist them in that strategy, certainly wouldn't have been seen as being blue chip and the right type of advisors to do that kind of work.
Sean Quinn Jr. and his cousin Peter Dara Quinn were sentenced yesterday at the High Court in Dublin to 3 months in jail after being found to be in contempt of court.
Contempt of court is used usually to focus the mind, and it's a threat that doesn't often get invoked. Sean Quinn Jr. got 3 months, and his cousin Petey Quinn has never resurfaced in the Republic of Ireland, got 3 months in prison. And that was a big day. But the day in November when Sean Quinn Sr. was found also in contempt of court was just absolutely extraordinary.
The former billionaire businessman Sean Quinn has been jailed for 9 weeks for contempt of court.
The judge acknowledged there may be a serious dispute between the parties over a debt of €2.4 billion, but she said there was no question the bank was owed €455 million, and moving assets beyond its reach was nothing short of an outrageous contempt.
We would not have wanted any of that to happen, but it happened because they set out deliberately to put assets beyond the reach of the bank, to which the bank had a perfectly good legal entitlement, as determined time and time again by the courts.
The judge said she would allow a stay on the order pending an appeal, but Sean Quinn's lawyers told the High Court that he wanted to begin his sentence today.
The judge said you were dishonest. What's your reaction?
I'm not dishonest.
I think he was putting himself forward as a kind of national hero, and Irish national heroes, you know, go to jail. You know, if you haven't been to jail in the way you're not a real hero. And it was very odd in the way that he was kind of playing that out, and it was sort of adding or refurbishing his sense of humility.
She said Sean Quinn Sr. had spoken of the honourable and respectable way in which the businesses in the Quinn Group were run. She said the behaviour of the 3 men outlined in evidence before her was as far removed from the concept of honour and respectability as it was possible to be.
The whole story turned to the Quinn stealing taxpayers' assets. So we just give them an ideal opportunity to kill us. And they did. Everything was put together for 36, 37 years. It was all gone. We took on something we should never have taken on. We took on an institution, we took on a government and all strands of it, and we just were stupid.
The rural Culture man on the border area was an easy target. It almost seemed as if he was the fall guy. They made it seem as if he was the cause of the recession in Ireland. Even though the banks were broken, the government was broken, there was a whole lot. And they just couldn't fathom that people were so loyal to him down here.
The specific hostility from that community in the border area, to my mind, is completely misdirected. The person who nearly ruined their livelihoods is Sean Quinn.
Up around the border, they felt those guys in Dublin have wrecked it all for us, and then they're putting our guy out of business. It's the financial regulator in Dublin. It's the media in Dublin. It's the government in Dublin. And they don't understand what it's like to live in the country.
It's a very sad day to see Dad jailed today at the behest of Anglo-Irish Bank, the very bank who ruined this country. He is a father, grandfather and husband, and he will be missed dearly during this time.
As we speak tonight, your father is lying or sitting wherever he is in Mountjoy prison.
Yes.
And the reason he's in prison, we're told, by Mrs. Justice Dunn, eminent High Court judge, she said he has only himself to blame. It's quite a simple moral dilemma, which is comply or don't comply, prison, freedom.
Yeah.
Your father chose prison.
When Elizabeth Dunn said, look, we're giving him 9 weeks and he has a week or whatever time he needs to consider what he wants to say or do, I just took up in the court and I said, I'm going this evening. I went to the bar along with a couple of friends of mine, locals here, and I had 2 pints of beer and 2 or 3 double brandies, and headed straight for the white van and into Mountjoy.
What was it like when that door closed behind you?
I was drunk.
Often you'd say if somebody's gone to jail, you'd be a bit ashamed of it. But I never felt any shame with regard to his term in jail or Sean Jr.'s either. To some extent, there was it'd be wrong to say a pride. You'd prefer they didn't ever have to do it, but there was a kind of a, well, at least they've done it and they've been manly about it and they'll overcome it, and they did.
The Quinn saga is not just a story that takes place in a bubble. It affects everybody on the island. To this day, for his actions in his insurance company before any of this other battle came along, resulted in every man, woman and child who takes out an insurance policy in the Republic of Ireland paying a 2% levy, the Quinn levy, until something like 2038.
You know, you've got this incredible image of that man sitting in that amazing house, and then that night was sitting in a prison cell. There was a lot of shock in the area. A lot of people were wondering what this meant overall for everything, and there was certainly a lot of anger in the area from his supporters.
Why are you getting rid of one of the 3 or 4 best businessmen in the history of the state? Why do you want rid of him? What I'm saying is, they knew at the time that those loans were illegal. And everybody allowed this 2.3 billion to be loaned illegally. So where did the Irish government or anybody sit in all of this? We, the government, we regulate the banks. And we allowed this guy to do this. So I think they were caught in the headlights. Well, the only thing we can do with him now is kill him off, take all off him, and dead men don't talk. And he won't talk because he'll be gone. He'll have no money to fight us. We'll send him all the bills and we'll throw up old tax bills and we'll throw the kitchen sink at him for the next 2 or 3 years and we'll bury him. And they came close to it.
There have been in this country many businessmen who went bankrupt between 2007 and now. The vast majority of them follow the laws of the state, which are there for good reason. Some of them, like Sean Quinn, and he was the biggest example of this, make a decision to step across the line into illegality. And from the moment he did that, he's determined to keep going at any cost until somehow he regains control of his business.
So this is Doon Mountain. This is where over a 2-year period a huge number of attacks took place. The electrical substations were targeted, the wind farms were targeted, and dozens of telegraph poles were cut down. And it was all to cause disruption to all of the factories on the other side of that mountain. There were 2 distinct periods of attacks. They began in the days after the business was taken over, but developed over the following years. They were all about preventing the administrators from selling off the Quinn businesses.
Quinn Group has new owners and a new name, Aventus. More than 1,100 people are employed by the Aventus Group, jobs put at risk by a campaign of attacks.
The attacks started quite low scale and then they soon intensified. From cutting electricity wires to setting fire to vehicles to crashing cars into sides of buildings, part of an ongoing campaign of intimidation and threats to try to warn off people who were maybe attempting to buy parts of the business.
Fundamentally, this community and its employees are one and the same thing. I think there's a very narrow-minded minority who are actually conducting these campaigns of violence and sabotage and intimidation.
Paul O'Brien was tasked with essentially replacing Sean Quinn. He instructed the removal of the Q sign from HQ. That caused a lot of problems, and more attacks followed.
This week's attack is being viewed as a serious escalation. At least one man with 2 cans of petrol doused the cars outside the home of Paul O'Brien before setting them on fire. Mr. O'Brien, who was appointed chief executive of the group after Mr. Quinn's departure, said he believed it was part of a campaign.
Certain people want the new management out and they want the original management restored. And I think it's as simple and clear as that. It's not going away and it is escalating to a very dangerous level where somebody has potential to be killed.
Certainly the heavy-handed approach by an Irish government, selected by the people, to go in with that heavy hand into a rural area who had done nothing but good in that area and take it over and destroy it. I mean, it was criminal. And of course it was going to raise tensions, and of course things were going to happen, and did happen. Was I part of it? Absolutely not. Was I angry? Was it done because of my anger? Was it done because I was telling the truth about what the position was? Maybe. But was I involved in planning it or involved with it? Absolutely not.
Sean Quinn lost control of his business empire in 2011. Ever since, there's been a campaign of vandalism, which Mr. Quinn has condemned.
The Irish cement market started to liberalise in the 1990s, and as a result, both Sean Quinn and Kevin Lagan looked at building large plants. There was a bitterness there, there was a rivalry there that kind of spilled out when they both started to plant flags into the Republic market. When Quinn got into distress and the business was in peril, Kevin Lagan was an obvious buyer. The difficulty obviously was that there was this enmity in the past.
The Lagan Group will start work on the project inside a month, and they say they're surprised and disappointed by a contribution of £30,000 from the Sean Quinn Group to the objectors' funding.
Lagan was quite determined to try and rescue the business and rescue the jobs. And, you know, he would have had a lot of good standing with the banks, good standing. He was somebody who could easily have stepped into a lot of those businesses and just changed the name over the door. But obviously that was the problem for Quinn. He didn't want to see anybody's name over the door.
Lagan Cement is owned by Kevin Lagan, which is planning a joint venture with Quinn Group.
Kevin Lagan got a parcel in the post, and inside that parcel was a cigar box. Inside the cigar box was a bullet and a message that said, "Quinn, is this what you want?"
If you read between the lines, do you want to be coming into the lion's den to run a business and to contribute to making our community non-friendly? Let's use that word, non-friendly or hostile.
We're not going to get an entrepreneur to come up here and say, how is a Spanish firm, an American firm or whatever, are they going to spend all their profits in Ballyconnell and in the Cavan area? You must be joking. It's not going to happen. He showed unconditional loyalty. We in turn will have to show unconditional loyalty back to him. We have to get his business back.
Really, it was a case that the Quinn supporters didn't want anybody taking over the business, obviously, but I'd say Kevin Lagan probably would have been towards the top of people not to take the business over.
Border people have it in their blood. They are living in communities that have, you know, a long history of violence of different kinds, and they'll more easily turn to it than anybody else will. You know, and I'm not saying they're different animals from the rest of us, but you know, whether they have Provo links or V special links or whatever, you know, it's something that's nearer to the way they think than it would be to somebody in South Tipperary or anywhere like that, you know.
But I think, in fairness, the people around here had a better picture of what was happening in Ireland maybe than the people in Dublin. It wasn't any wonder that people became angry and expressed that anger.
Although he declined to be interviewed on camera this evening, Mr. Quinn said he condemned the attacks. He said he never had been involved in violence and never would be.
Whatever happens in business, but you should never have to bring it home to your wife and kids. So all I can say is, whoever's doing it, please stop.
The whole thing was a mess. I mean, the whole attacks that happened, people were pointing the finger at me. I had no hand, act or part in any attack. I suppose I played a bit of football, and you get a box in the mouth, or you give one or get one, and you have to get on with life. There's no point in crying about it. You just get on and move on.
The intimidation and the violence basically scared everybody off. So I think there was a feeling that you weren't going to get an outside buyer, that the buyer for the business would probably have to come from the inside.
Something had to be done. We weren't able to continue to keep the business from being sold, but we had to have an alternative. We had to have a management buyout.
There were lots of rumours at the time that there was work underway to try to come up with a plan that would see the return of Quinn. Essentially, what was happening was there was a consortium, a local consortium that were meeting regularly, trying to thrash out a plan that would see them take control of the Quinn business and then return Sean Quinn to that business.
Well, the proposition was put to me was that Paul O'Brien had been trying to sell the business from 2011 right through to 2013 because of the discontent in the area and that there wasn't many takers for it. So John McCartan came to me in 2014, early 2014, and said that there could be a deal done and that they were in a position to buy the manufacturing business. And of course that was sweet music to my ears, that this company should go back to where it belonged, and the ABCD, and it should come back into the family and the community.
John McCartan's a Fine Gael councillor at the time and a businessman, and he was very well regarded in the border region, but also in business. And he was someone that got on very well with Sean Quinn. Their families went back years. John McCartan and Sean Quinn were very close.
So I rang Liam McCaffrey and I asked to meet him. Liam said he would, and he arranged to meet all the directors, past directors of Quinn Group, and they all met the following night. And every single one of them agreed, you know, that they would throw their shoulder to the wheel and they would get on board.
They called it QBRC, Quinn Business Retention Company.
When we got involved in this, we didn't get involved to get 22% or 27% or any percent of this business for ourselves. We got involved in this to straighten out the mess that was here and look after the Quinn.
Keep the business in this area and hopefully one day hand the whole thing back to them.
Our group, between signs and protests and anything we could do that could deter Paul O'Brien, who was the receiver, from selling off, breaking up the businesses and selling them off to interested parties, and Lagan was one of those, and then there was a company from England interested in the packaging, RPC, a packaging company. We got word, probably from internally, naturally, in Quinn's, and they rang me up to say that this was happening and Paul was going to sell that business, and that was important, that was crucial, you know, to the QBRC package, and that would have to stay within the group. It wasn't viable without that. And then said that we would have to write them a letter to persuade them not to pursue their interest.
The letter worked. The English packaging company immediately pulled out of the deal. The administrators and the American bondholders that were still owed over €1 billion were being frustrated at every attempt to sell off the business. But in the spring of 2014, despite the previous threat to his life, Kevin Lagan came back to the table to make a bid for Quinn roof tiles. But that only made him a target for Quinn supporters again. And over the course of one weekend, his businesses north and south were attacked, causing over €1 million worth of damage.
There have been arson attacks on 3 Lagan-related properties at Cumber and Lisburn, and as far away as County Cork. The attacks began after Aventus announced it was selling Quinn roof tiles and that the new owners were committed to continuing employment and production.
Kevin Lagan was initially determined to go through with the deal for the roof tile factory. But then another death threat arrived, this time on the morning of his wife's death. He had had enough and he pulled out. For the American bondholders, it was the last straw. They were still owed over €1.1 billion. And it was at this point they began to enter negotiations with Quinn's business allies and former management team, QBRC. So this is the 140-page agreement between QBRC and the 3 American bondholders, which effectively saw an agreement to set up a new company which would manage the cement business and this packaging business. But what it didn't include was the glass factory, the business that Sean Quinn really wanted to get his hands on. What the bondholders and QBRC agreed in this document was that if there was no what they called community interference, defined as sabotage, threats and intimidation, there's a specific clause in the deal. QBRC would get a higher percentage from the sale of the glass business. You know, there's huge amount of detail throughout this document, and who it never names is Sean Quinn. Sean Quinn's name is not in this agreement.
I suppose the one element that would have been surprised would have been whether Sean Quinn was involved or not, and how far he would have got. But that seems to have been slapped down pretty quickly by the 3 hedge funds. They didn't really want to be seen to have Sean Quinn in direct control, and in terms of what that reputationally would mean for them. And I think there would have been a lot of questions asked of them if, because of the whole history. his retention then as a consultant, almost like a presidential role, would have sat well, because that would have meant that he wasn't in control of the business, but locally he would have still seemed to have been involved.
The site has been purchased by the Quinn Business Retention Company, which is run by local business owners and supporters of the former billionaire. Mr. Quinn was greeted by cheering and clapping when he visited the premises this morning.
Pictures are on the television of the boys all back in and Sean Quinn going about with the tray of drinks. So we were all delighted and we were all chuffed, and sure, it was what we had campaigned for.
I was there watching a cherry picker go up onto the side of the building to remove the Aventus sign. And they took it down and they set fire to it.
We thought at that stage, mission accomplished, we can take a breather. But naturally, because of what had happened, he couldn't be seen to be back in there as boss. He wasn't CEO. The CEO was Liam McCaffrey. He was going to be responsible for manufacturing and sales. The administration side of it and the financial side of it, day to day, that was Liam and Dara's job. Everybody knew, even the dogs in the street knew, that that was the plan and that was agreed upon.
As far as I was concerned, I was completely in control. I rang Liam and said, Liam, could I meet you? And a bit of a chat. So I said to him, am I the boss here? So I had my suspicions, but even after that, day by day, week by week, you could see that there was something wrong.
They blame him.
And I found out all of a sudden, so there's nobody reporting to me. And of course, then the first morning I went in, I said to Liam, you have stabbed me in the back. He didn't like it. And the people around the table didn't believe it. They thought he was genuine and that he was doing the thing for the right reasons. That's the way it was.
We are in the ship.
Well, effectively, Sean Quinn didn't believe anybody else should own the business apart from him, least of all his three former lieutenants. And then, obviously, it came to a boiling point when they sold the glass business. The fact that this was being sold, as he saw it, from underneath him, was something that he couldn't countenance, and that really was, that was the beginning of the end of that relationship.
This isn't good enough.
Sean Quinn has been totally ignored and humiliated. And no one knew better than Liam that once Sean would get humiliated, then there'd start to be outbursts.
Get Quinn in, make a fool of him. Don't put him on any board, don't give him any say, give him £500,000 a year, keep his mouth shut, and promise him that we'll be doing something for him sometime in the future.
Well, where are we going to
They explained to us, and they were very convincing, that you couldn't work with Sean. Too disruptive, hostile attitude, and Quinn, you couldn't work with him. You couldn't work with him. But how did he work with him for the previous 20 years?
Sean, in my view, was a very different person than he was before. He was angry and frustrated. Nothing was good enough for him. He wanted full control of the business. That was just legally impossible. He assumed that we would put him back in the position that he was in 7 or 8 years earlier. But he assumed it without any scintilla of realism. It's just impossible.
I felt I had no choice. I knew the game was up. So they said, okay, bye-bye. Not a penny from Alan Dukes, not a penny of redundancy, not a penny from anybody for anything. Nothing. Just everybody tried to bleed us dry so we couldn't pursue them.
When the news came through that he'd left the business, there was a state of disbelief. It really was a case of him almost overplaying his hand once he'd left the business and once he'd left the building. It was very hard to see of any way he could get back in.
I built that company. They didn't build that company. I built that company. I allowed them to win, or agreed for them to win, to hold that in safe hands.
There was allegations being made all over the place on both sides. One saying one thing, the other saying a different thing. But this time there was something a wee bit more hostile about it. That was very hot and heavy.
I'm still fit, I'm still keen, I'm still determined, and I think it has all the support to make it as good as it could be made based on the position it's in.
They were trying to give an excuse of why they would push Sean Quinn out. That doesn't lead to good relations, and people can get wrong ideas in their head.
Sean Quinn was out of the business again. The wind farms and the plastics business and the glass plant, they were all gone. For a period of time, there were discussions between QBRC and the Quinn family, but a deal proved impossible. Violence returned to the border, and this time the very executive team that Sean Quinn had built became the targets.
The second phase of attacks began towards the end of 2015. This time the targets were the management of the company, Kevin Lunny, Darragh O'Reilly and Liam McCaffrey. Posters calling them money grabbers and making threats began to appear on the border. Here we have the incident of the pig's head that caused massive controversy here at the time. The pig's head was left at the home of Kevin Lunny. It was found by one of his daughters. It was seen as a very sinister move and caused much revulsion in the area.
They have annoyed a lot of people. The number of farmers across the side of that mountain, and the number of customers, and the number of people that have issued legal proceedings against and would renege on the deal with the Quinns. So they have a lot of enemies.
This is the moment that James Bernard McGovern threw a cup of hot tea in Darragh O'Reilly's face before hitting Kevin Lunny up to 7 or 8 times.
We don't know whose corns Kevin has tramped on. If he hadn't got his message then, he wasn't listening. There was people saying things, and people, were getting uneasy. And they still live in the community and think that nothing would happen.
Judge Aylmer sentenced James McGovern to 3 years and 3 months for assaulting Kevin Lunny and 5 months to be served concurrently for the attack on Darragh O'Reilly.
We have had an escalation of what you might call the deliberate physical targeting of executives. Had what has been happening to the Quinn executives here been happening to somebody from Facebook or from Google or from Intel, there would have been national outcry. I made a comment that said, look, if something isn't done, lives will be lost here.
The bank, IBRC and the Quinn family were effectively eyeballing each other down in the High Court in Dublin.
Mr Quinn's 5 adult children have begun a legal action against the Irish Bank Resolution Corporation over loans of €2.3 billion given by Anglo to Quinn companies.
The children denied liability for more than €400 million. They claimed all decisions were made by their father and the bank knew this. But Anglo's successor, IBRC, said the children's claims were extraordinary and they knew what they were doing.
They all knew that there was money put into that bank on my kids' behalf. And they all know that I was stupid to allow it to happen. I accept that. Then they took security on the assets that we had already paid for. And as far as I was concerned, these were our assets, not their assets. So hopefully the court will tell the tale on this, and that the true story will come out of what was done, and more importantly, why it was done.
None of us could have foreseen that we would be here 8 years later. I think it would have broken us if we had known that at the time. I don't think the state thought we'd ever see this day, and I think that was part of their strategy. I think they thought we'd give up. I think they thought we'd break. I think they thought we'd run out of money, but we're here.
The family had this case which they were suing the bank, saying that the bank's security over the shares in the company was tainted with illegality. If that case was successful, the bank and the liquidator of the bank was in serious trouble because they would have had a massive claim against the bank. So there was always talk of a settlement. There was certainly one had come very close, and I think over time the Quinn's case was weakened and the bank's case was strengthened.
Could we have got a deal? Probably. Could we have been closer? Was there a discussion around a certain deal? An hotel and 2 pubs? There was. We asked them, could we take it away for a week? And we did. And we went back and said, we'll accept that deal. And they said, no, that deal's not on the table anymore.
IBRC's pursuit of the money, they had got a real breakthrough in a court case in Hong Kong, again showing the global nature of this saga, which effectively really put them in a very strong position.
The long-running legal battle between Sean Quinn's family and the former Anglo-Irish Bank has been settled in its entirety.
As part of the settlement reached in relation to all the proceedings, the court heard judgments of just over €88 million are to be entered against each of the 5 children. But there's to be a stay on the registration and execution of the judgments on confidential terms agreed between the parties.
So the settlement in the end that was reached between the 2 sides, even though the family didn't lose anything, they didn't get anything.
Disappointed with the whole thing, I suppose. We felt very strongly that the assets that Anglo were taking from us in India, Russia and Ukraine, they didn't own them, they didn't finance them, and we felt that we had every right to move them. Of course, we know that was a major mistake and we shouldn't have, and the court found that we had no right to move them, even though we felt that we owned them and that Anglo were going to steal them. The court didn't see it that way.
Justice Peter Kelly spoke of the deviousness of the scheme operated by the Quinn family.
He said the Quinns cynically sought to put assets beyond the reach of the bank and feathered the Quinns' own nest, and it reeked of dishonesty and sharp practice.
If he'd played his hand well, if he'd actually got into the room with the special liquidator and managed to get a settlement, a monetary settlement, it may have provided him with the capital to try and buy back the rest of the business.
Well, there's been huge speculation about Cyril McGuinness. Did you know Cyril McGuinness?
Oh, I knew him, yeah. Everybody knew Dublin Jimmy. In fact, he didn't like being called Dublin Jimmy, but that's I didn't call him anything. How are you doing? That's as far as I went.
But you never asked Dublin Jimmy or Cyril McGuinness to take out any
I was never
action on your
talking
behalf?
I was never talking to him.
Cyril McGuinness was from Dublin originally, spent his formative childhood years there before moving to the border region, Derry Lynn in Fermanagh. As soon as he was there, you know, he forged close links with various criminals, various members of paramilitary organisations in that area, and that's where the violence started. For McGuinness, you know, they believe he was recruited for the sole aim of intimidation because they knew he had that standing in the border region. They knew he had that image in the border area that if they wanted something done, if they wanted to put pressure on people, if they wanted to intimidate people not to go to work, not to go about their daily business, then the man to do that was Cyril McGuinness. This was someone who was heavily involved in organised crime, who was extremely violent, and he was willing to pay people to do his dirty work.
His
His attack represented an escalation in the campaign of intimidation and violence against the executive team in recent years.
It was a Tuesday evening, September 17th, 2019. Mr. Lunny left work sometime after 6 o'clock, and he was driving up this narrow little country lane that leads to his home in Derry Lynn in County Fermanagh, when he saw the white BMW parked in the laneway in front of him. And he said immediately as he stopped, this BMW reversed. Immediately, two men emerged from that BMW. They were both wearing face masks. Their faces were completely covered and they were wearing black clothing. These two men approached Mr. Lunny's car and tried to drag him out of it, and he said there was a scuffle. He kicked at them from inside the vehicle. So it took some time for them to get him out of the Land Cruiser. And when they got him outside, he realized that there was another man had arrived in an Audi A4. Described him as being bigger, heavier set than the other two. So this man had a Stanley knife in his hand, and he held it to Mr. Lunny's face. He felt the Audi start up and move at speed. This journey continued for about 40 to 50 minutes. The boot opened up again, and he noticed that he was in a very overgrown area. He figured it was a farmyard of some kind, pretty unkempt, and there were a number of trailers, in particular a blue trailer. Once he was in there, this is when really, I suppose, the abduction has turned into a false imprisonment now, and the assault on Mr. Lunny would begin inside that trailer.
In this door of a container type thing. The same guy who had the Stanley knife came over and said, "You know why you're here?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It's because of QAH, and you're going to resign."
They also told him that he was to end these injunctions and court cases north and south of the border. And when he was asked if he understood what that meant, Mr. Lunny said that he had taken an interim injunction against someone in Belfast, and that he had some defamation cases in Dublin and Belfast as well. At that point, his attacker then held him up and told him, "So that you'll remember why you're here. We need to mark you so that you'll remember why this happened." They then took bleach and they used a rag to rub bleach into his legs, into his torso. That caused him immense amount of pain, he said. And then they used the bag to rub the bleach all over his face and head. They then used a wooden bat to strike Mr. Lunny's shin. He said that after the first strike, he knew that his shin had broken, but then he was struck again almost immediately in exactly the same place. They told him that they were going to leave him at the side of a road, but he was warned, "Do not look back." And he was pushed out of the van with his face facing towards the ditch. And the material was removed from his head, and then he was aware that the van drove off behind him.
A board member of Quinn Industrial Holdings claimed today the attack was carried out by people who were contracted and paid to do it.
This is clearly an act that was procured, that was resourced, that was financed. There were cars stolen. It was planned weeks in advance.
If there doesn't come some good out of the suffering Kevin went through, I don't know what. But yes, there seems to be still a lot of anger out there.
This morning, as part of an ongoing investigation, Gardaí made 3 arrests. Amid high security, the men were brought to Virginia courthouse this morning. The details of the allegations against the men cannot be reported at this stage. Gardaí hearsay, their investigation is continuing.
The Gardaí were able to see from the mobile phone records and his phone contacts that Cyril McGuinness was in contact with these men in and around these events relating to Mr. Lunny. His involvement was also established through the fact that he was the person present when the Audi A4 that was used, that Mr. Lunny was bundled into at the very start of this ordeal, he was present when that was purchased.
He was the man pulling the strings. McGuinness then travelled to England and he had a safe house in England. And as the investigation gathered pace, McGuinness was identified as the prime suspect, as the organiser, and as a joint cooperation between the PSNI, the Gardaí and the UK police, they moved to arrest him. And when they went to arrest him, the door was kicked in. He was there, he was smoking a cigarette, and he just collapsed and died.
The IRA member turned dissident Republican and gangster had over 50 criminal convictions. When Derbyshire police burst into the house where he was staying at 8:30 this morning, the 53-year-old fell ill, collapsed and died.
Anything that Cyril McGuinness did was all about money. It wasn't about, you know, the local community, helping the local community, assisting the local community, providing jobs in the local community, and that showed you the type of personality that he had. But for him, everything was just about money.
The attack on Kevin changed everything. It changed people's perception that this attack, they believed at the time, was carried out in support of Quinn. And I think he has lost a lot of respect in the area from people who would have previously supported him.
Did you have anything to do with the attack on Kevin Lunny?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why would I bother my head with Kevin Lunny? Just think about why would I bother my head with Kevin Lunny. One thing I think that somebody should ask Kevin Lunny, why was he attacked? What they have done over the last 6-7 years, and the level of betrayal is probably unprecedented in the history of this state. Now, I have nothing good to say about Kevin Lunny. I'd like to make a presentation to somebody that had a major influence on the success of Quinn Direct over the past 10 years. Somebody has to have the respect of their colleagues, and that's the important thing in life. Kevin Lunny always had the respect of his colleagues. I don't think that anybody, regardless of what way they're annoyed, they should have stooped to the level of what they done to Kevin Lunny. That should never happen. Human beings don't do that to each other. But there'll be doubts in people's minds, you know, Jesus, how come there's television crews from all over Ireland promoting this thing about Sean Quinn and that he was responsible for the abduction of Kevin Lunny? I mean, people do believe that.
At 3 o'clock this afternoon, workers downed tools and came together. The attack on Kevin Lunny, the Chief Operating Officer at Quinn Industrial Holdings, has shocked everyone here.
I spent a while with Kevin at the hospital the night before last, and he's a man of integrity, a man of faith, and he's able to call on great inner resources that we hope will help him recover.
This tactic is to frighten, intimidate, and terrorize ordinary people. I now believe that there has been a mafia-style group with its own godfather operating in our region for some time behind the scenes. This well-planned and well-organized abduction could only have happened if some person with ulterior motives agreed to pay these criminals a sum of money and gave instruction on what he required to be done to an unsuspecting victim. Some devious people are so consumed with hatred and enmity that they lose their moral compass and are prepared to hire the most ruthless of criminals to achieve their sinister goals. They also become compulsive liars. This region deserves better. This region and its resources belong to all its hard-working citizens.
Every morning you get up, it's no different. You've just this heavy load every morning. Enormous pressure. Yeah. And it translates onto children, I think, and everybody in the house, because everyone is in bad form.
You know, what they've done to us is unbelievable. It was hard to believe they'd go and try to take the business off us, but now to try to make us criminals being involved in Kevin Lunny's attack. Don't worry about the boys that done it. Get Sean Quinn, get the whoever's paying the money.
And the priest was the instigator of all that.
Well, he was badly advised. He was badly advised.
Yeah. I'll never forgive him. Never. Never. And he came in here in this house, and he had tea, and he had wine, and he had everything he wanted. And that's what he did. A backstabber. That's what he is, a pure backstabber.
The people have to believe it. They have to believe that there's something in this. Surely the priest wouldn't be getting up on the altar and blaming Sean Quinn if he wasn't involved somewhere.
Further distance you take from it, it becomes this kind of clear-cut case of a guy who over-borrowed, made this crazy bet on a single share of a single bank, and then had to be bailed out by that same bank. And it was just seen as so toxic. It's not black and white. The legacy of the businesses will always be there for the people who work in them and for their families and for the local area. But there's some pretty big missteps that can't ever be forgotten.
For all my criticisms of Sean Quinn, I think the thing you can't take away from him is that he put a lot of backbone into communities that had been abandoned and abused, made them feel that they mattered. And I think the strength of purpose that we've been getting from those border communities over the Brexit crisis has at least something to do with the legacy of Sean Quinn.
It's a legacy that's definitely tainted, tarnished. The insurance levy, the fact that people are still paying it, there was a cost to the taxpayer then, but even those things would have been, I think, probably forgivable over time if it hadn't been what has happened in terms of the violence and the intimidation which has been perpetrated by supporters of Quinn. That overrides everything, I think.
The words that come to mind when I think of Sean Quinn are delusion and defiance. I often felt, looking at those children at the beginning of their adult lives when they were getting married, having their first babies, for them to have to go through close to a decade of living under that pressure in those circumstances, and for a father to have put them through that because of his own determination and his own delusion, and because of some misguided concept of mafia-like family loyalty. That to me just strikes me as being sad. I mean, this, at the end of the day, is a tragedy, really. And I don't think there are any winners, certainly not among the Quinns.
I think he deserves to be remembered as somebody who achieved a remarkable economic revitalisation of a very depressed area of the country. And the footnote will have to be that the great pity is that he gambled it all away.
Do you think that Sean Quinn still has money sitting somewhere? There's many people.
Yeah. There's reason to believe that a good chunk of it was brought to Switzerland, where it's probably in an inaccessible account, and that there's a substantial amount of money in India as well.
I'm delighted to unveil Mannock as a new brand of the business moving forward. This marks a significant step. We've incorporated the colour green. The green is the Fermanagh colours, and the name Mannock is associated with Fermanagh. So it's the roots of where this business has come from, and it's to reflect that in the new name.
All I can say is that in my 75 years, I never knowingly took anything that didn't belong to me. Never. I think my legacy will be that I built up a great company. I employed a lot of people in a very poor area. I was an honest man, and that the area will be more successful because of Sean Quinn than it would be without him, and that he got rough justice.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay.
And you can catch up on all episodes of Quinn Country on the RTE player. Coming up at 11:30 tonight, highlights of the ceremony celebrating the leading business talent in the country. That's the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Awards 2022.